Group Fitness Fundamentals, Components of Fitness, Chapters 5, 6, and 7. There are 5 typical class components that you see in most classes. There are always exceptions to the rule, but you'll always see a warm-up in a fitness class. You may or may not see a cardiovascular workout and cool down, depending on the class. You may or may not see some muscular conditioning section, but you should always see a flexibility and relaxation piece. So if it's a resistance training class, you're not going to have cardio component, and if it's some cardio classes, do not have a muscular conditioning component. So it really just depends. Sometimes you have a class that alternates between cardio and strength, which is also appropriate. So there's lots of variations on this basic structure, and the length of classes can even vary. Some classes you teach are 30 minutes, some are 90. So it really just depends on what is advertised, what the participants are wanting, and what the facility is offering. So let's start with the warm-up. There are numerous benefits to warming up. It's such an important piece of the puzzle. And unfortunately, there are lots of people that miss the warm-up. So really encourage people that come in late to take the 3 or 4 minutes to slowly, gradually introduce their body to the activity you're doing. So whatever you're doing in your class, they need to do at a lower intensity for about 3 or 4 minutes to make sure their body is ready for work, not just to jump in at the highest level that you're already at with your class, because they've already warmed up. So we're basically preparing the body for upcoming work. So you're increasing body temperature, heart rate, and respiration. Metabolism is going up, getting blood flowing away from the gut and to the muscles. Synovial fluid is being released in the joints, so allowing for better lubrication and better movement. Getting the muscles ready for a range of motion that's going to happen. You're getting the exchange of oxygen between blood and muscles is becoming more efficient and increasing. There's lots of things happening. The tendons and ligaments are getting ready for work. The muscles are getting ready for work. It's really important to get these things started and set up for the rest of the workout. It really impacts the success of that workout coming up after that. We're actually getting into decreasing muscle relaxation time following contraction, so the muscles are sharp, awake, ready to go and contract. And we're reducing risk of injury, making sure people are ready, making sure tissues are not going to get damaged. So the warm-up has a lot of physiological reasons to be included, so it's so important. There's also psychological. It gets people in the class, it establishes the atmosphere, gets people ready to work. You can set the tone of the class. It also gets people to focus in on what they're doing and not thinking about all the other things that they think they should be doing or have to do after class. So it gets them focused in, gets them ready to work. So when you're making your warm-up, you're looking at about 5 to 10 minutes, depending on who your class is. Beginners will need more time, advanced people will need less, including full body movements and range of motion. So moving through the hips and shoulders through all possible movements and in a variety of planes. This doesn't really apply to a cycling class. We're basically just getting the legs ready, gradually adding more resistance on the bike before we go into anything that's super heavy and climbing. But in a choreography class or in a sport conditioning class or a muscular conditioning class, this definitely applies, moving the body in all possible planes that you're going to use in the class. Including some kind of rehearsal move. So these movements are used in the cardio component, but they are less intense because you're just practicing, getting the brain and the muscles to talk, getting your neurological senses firing. You will be teaching something that is challenging or new, and you want to practice it in the warm-up at a lower intensity or a slower pace. So including those rehearsal moves in the warm-up is great, because then you can get them with their brains when they're fresh and get them to develop a new movement pattern without having any extra fatigue or intensity. So including also dynamic rather than static stretching. You can hold your stretch for 5 to 10 seconds, but a nice flowing dynamic movement is actually good for flow. It's nice and active. You're still feeling some work happening, so you're not holding and standing still. We want to increase mobility and decrease muscle tension, not increase flexibility in this stretching component. So it's not bouncing, but it's dynamic flowing movement. So think of arm circles as a dynamic stretch as opposed to holding a chest stretch. So it's more movement, it's in control, it's safe range of motion, and it's something that opens up the joints. So also including a few deep breaths, also to warm up the diaphragm for breathing because it is a muscle too. So including that as well is definitely a good idea. So there's some sample warm-ups on your DVD. There's a step warm-up, a high-low warm-up, and a sport conditioning warm-up that you can watch on your DVD, and they're referenced on the manual on those corresponding pages. Some ideas for some rehearsal moves. In a step class, use your step during the warm-up. So you actually introduce stepping onto the bench in the warm-up. In a cycling, you might teach them how to climb a hill, so what the technique is like, where their hands go on a standing climb, or where their legs and butt needs to be on the seat to do a seated climb, those types of things. How to use their resistance and their brake, for example, would also be a way to rehearse. Muscle class, you could practice specific movements from the workout. So you're going to use squats in your strength class, and you want to make sure you teach them the basic fundamentals without a lot of load in the warm-up. Simple thing to do. High-low, you could practice a move or a simple pattern that you're going to use later on in the cardio section. And in a sport conditioning class, you might do slow motion ladder drills. You might do catching drills with a basketball as opposed to a medicine ball. So something that's less intense, a little slower, gives people a chance to practice and get used to the movements. Dynamic stretching always is controlled. You're looking at 4 basic muscle groups, hamstrings, calves, quadriceps, and adductors for lower body. So it's something that opens up the hamstrings in a dynamic way, the calf, quadriceps, and adductors. That's something you want to look at and focus on. In the choreography course, we will actually go through some examples of how you can do that in a fitness scenario, as well as in the sport conditioning. In cycling, we don't really do any dynamic stretching because the movement on the bike is dynamic. So we don't get off the bike and stretch dynamically in a cycle class. We just go from a nice gradual warm-up into the work. But it's very appropriate to include it in your choreography and your sport conditioning classes. Whenever you're doing dynamic stretching, it's a good idea to incorporate arm movements to help keep the heart rate up and keep that feeling of flow going. And you're looking about 8 reps or 32 beats, which is equal to about 15 seconds. So it's not a lot of time. It's very quick, but it's very effective. So the next piece of the puzzle would potentially be cardiovascular endurance. And this is the capacity of the heart and lungs and circulatory system to take in, deliver, and use enough blood, fuel, and oxygen to exercising muscles for an extended period of time. So you just become a more efficient working machine. So what you need is what you get, and you can use what you're bringing in. It's basically the cornerstone of health. It's the thing that's going to help prevent or delay the onset of lifestyle diseases like diabetes, cancer, heart disease, stroke, high cholesterol, osteoporosis, all those things. It's very, very, very important to include into a workout routine. In terms of intensity for the cardiovascular section, you want to challenge with intensity, but you don't want to overwhelm them. So gradually increase during the workout from warm-up into the cardio, and then you give them options. So low, medium, and high intensity, and then support their choices, give them options, encourage them, and make sure that you show the levels and then stay in the middle, and then kind of morph back and forth, and so that your fit people are choosing and remembering the higher level, and your beginners are remembering where they need to work as well. On your DVD, there's actually some suggestions on intensity and verbal cueing that you can use that would relate to this piece. So think about using continuous large muscle movements. So you're moving your whole body in over and over and over and over in that cardiovascular section for about 20 minutes, right? 20 minutes is where we're going to get most of the benefits that we're going to receive. So a minimum of 20, and people are doing great. And the 20 minutes might be broken up into chunks. If you're doing an interval, that would work as well. Cardiovascular cool down. So that is basically the last few segments of the cardio segment. So it's less intense to allow for recovery, and recovered heart rate's about 100 beats per minute. So the music is slower, the moves performed with less effort, smaller range of motion. I recommend keeping your cool down simple. Walk around, march, heel digs in front, tap to the side, no arms. You're wanting the heart rate to come down. Going and grabbing your water bottle, keeping your head above your heart, making sure that you keep your feet moving. Just little things just to get their blood basically and their heart to stop pumping as fast as the blood is circulating properly and not pooling in their legs. If they stop completely, then what might happen is that they might pass out because the heart's pumping blood is going to the muscles, but the muscles aren't contracting, and the muscles, when they contract, they actually help milk the blood back to the heart. So if the blood pools in the legs and has trouble getting up against gravity, the brain signals that there's no oxygen coming to it, and you get lightheaded or dizzy. So making sure that the legs are moving to keep the blood flowing up to the heart, the muscles are milking the blood back up to the heart and the brain. Very, very important. So the cool down gets your heart rate down, prevents pooling in the blood, as I mentioned, helps reduce soreness and stiffness, and promotes faster removal of waste products out of the system from whatever activity you were doing. So cool downs are really important to make sure you incorporate. And depending on your group, you might need a longer cool down. Unfit people need more time. Less fit people recover quite quickly. So plan on anywhere from 2 to 5 minutes for a cool down. Remember, suddenly stopping can lead to that venous pooling, the dizziness, lightheadedness, and passing out fainting, which I've mentioned. But that also includes if someone's shoelace comes undone in class and they stop to tie it, they can get that same feeling. So if someone's shoelace comes undone or they have to pick up their phone or whatever, their babysitter's calling, they need to walk around first before they stop and tie their shoes or walk around and talk on the phone to make sure that they don't get that feeling. And as I mentioned, about 5 minutes, less time for your fit people. So there's a DVD of an example of a cool down on your a DVD example on your DVD, so you can check that out. Resistance training, muscular conditioning, strength training, all the same thing. Basically, we're looking at improving muscular strength and endurance of the major muscle groups. So when we perform strength activities, we're talking about maximal tension in one contraction, so lifting something heavy once and being done. Endurance is lifting something a number of times without fatigue or holding something for an extended period of time. Power is performing a certain amount of work in the shortest time possible, so adding a little bit of speed to a strength movement. And stability is maintaining a desired position, so you're actually balancing. So those are all pieces of the strength and endurance puzzle in a class. Adding resistance training to any workout is very beneficial because you are able to possibly change body composition by increasing the amount of lean or muscle tissue, and then as a result, increasing metabolism. So the more lean tissue you have on your body, the more energy you burn when you brush your teeth, when you sleep. So then you're burning more calories, more energy all day. Also, resistance training promotes stronger bones, muscles, tendons, and ligaments. So your bones actually get thicker because the muscles pull on the bones, causing the bone to get stronger and thicker. So good idea for preventing osteoporosis. Preventing injury, making sure that things are balanced between the dominant or strong side of the joint as opposed to the weaker. So for example, the front thigh or quadriceps tend to be very strong because we use them in all of our movements, when we walk, when we run, whereas the hamstrings are not as strong, so we need to focus on making those stronger to get closer to equal strength between the front and the back of the knee joint. Preventing lower back pain, so strengthening the core is a huge piece. Improving self-confidence and improved activities of daily living. For people learning a new resistance training skill or an exercise, it's great because they get into a mastery zone where they're actually learning something new, getting better at it, more coordinated, and seeing results. So it's a really good self-esteem booster. Guidelines for resistance training. So we're looking at our resistance training class, about 8 to 10 exercises of the major muscle groups of the body. So that would be chest, back, legs, and legs can be broken up into hamstrings, front thigh, or quadriceps, core, biceps, triceps, shoulders. That would give you 8 to 10 exercises or body parts to focus on. A cardio combo class might be 4 or 5 exercises. I would focus on upper body because you're going to be doing cardio with the lower body in between. So you might do 4 minutes of cardio, 2 minutes of push-ups, 4 minutes of cardio, 2 minutes of back rows, 4 minutes of cardio, 2 minutes of core, those types of things. I also could be at the end of a cardio class. So the muscles that we didn't use in class or that tend to be weaker because of our posture, so focusing on the back as opposed to the chest, or muscles that we didn't use in class, so rather than going lower body, we focus on upper body, and of course focusing on the core. Great opportunity to get the core stronger. We want to focus on getting our muscles to fatigue, so making sure you have the appropriate load. So endurance exercises, we're looking at about 12 to 20 repetitions for one set, or 30 to 90 seconds, give or take. So by the time you get to the 90 seconds or the 20 repetitions, you should be saying to yourself, I don't think I can do any more, I'm done. If you're not saying that, if you're like saying, I could probably do this forever, then it's not heavy enough. Strength and endurance combination is about 8 to 15 repetitions. Just strength, you're looking at about 5 to 8 repetitions. So by 8 repetitions, you cannot lift anymore. Your technique starts to go, you start to cheat, that means you need to stop. And power would be about 1 to 5 repetitions. And remember, power has a speed component to it, so making sure that we're staying safe in there. Tend to not do a lot of power movements in our fitness classes, mostly because we don't have appropriate load, but also it's not as safe when you're working with a group of people. Number of sets, so looking at getting in a minimum of 1 set, so getting most of the changes possible in that 1 set to fatigue, especially for beginners. If you have intermediate or advanced people, you're probably going to have to do more than 1 set for them to get results because their body is more trained. So, but beginners, they just need 1 set to fatigue and then they're going to be getting stronger. Workouts 2 to 3 times per week. Beginner needs 2 times per week. That's not a huge commitment. And they're going to get most of the changes in those 2 times a week than if they did 3. So adding that third for a beginner, if time is tight and they're either still on the fence in terms of if they're able to commit to being physically active, then just get them to do the 2. If you're working with more advanced intermediate people, you're probably going to have to work out more often to get the changes because their body is more adapted and needs to have that extra push on it. Flexibility is integral to all exercise sessions, regardless of what type of class you're teaching. It improves performance, posture, relaxation, that mind-body connection, decreases risk of injury, muscle tension and soreness, and overall stress. It's so important for people to slow down and just breathe and open up their body and open up their joints. So flexibility technically is range of motion around a joint or a group of joints, and it's specific to each joint. So just because you're flexible in your hamstring doesn't mean you're flexible in your hip flexor. Chances are, if you're open in the back thigh, you're tighter or closed in the front thigh. You'll find that flexibility will decrease with age and inactivity. So if you don't do it, you'll lose it with this. And the more open and flexible you are, you have a smoother and more efficient flow of movement. Just remember, there is a point of being too flexible so that you don't want to push it past what's a normal range and safe range of motion. But so important to include after activity. So stretching is included in the warm-up. Remember, that's dynamic, so there's a moving component to that. The post-cardio cool-down, you might do a stretch there before you go into the strength training piece. That might be appropriate for your class. But you're definitely including after resistance training exercise and then at the end of class. So you might do a push-up and then stretch the chest right away, and then do a back row and then stretch the lats or upper back. So you might include it that way, or you might save all the stretching for the very, very end of class. All are appropriate. In terms of types of stretching, we have static stretching, which is a gradual, slow stretch, and you hold it for a specific amount of time. You're holding for about 30 seconds or 5 to 8 deep, slow breaths. This is the one that improves flexibility, and you can make this passive or active. So a passive stretch is you kind of just lay in it. You don't actually contract or do anything. An active stretch where you actually contract the opposing muscle. So if you were to do a front thigh stretch standing on one leg, so you have your front leg bent, then grabbing onto the back thigh. So let's get a picture here for you. Doing a front thigh stretch. So you're standing on one leg, you bend the one leg, grab onto the foot with the same side arm. Knees are pointing down. You pull the belly in, the shoulders are back, chest is open. This would be passive if that's all you did. But if you actually squeeze the glute and push the hip forward, that becomes an active stretch. And it actually increases the intensity of the stretch of the hip flexor quite a bit. So passive would just be standing there, hanging out in this position. Active would be actually squeezing the glute and pushing that hip forward. So that would be the difference between an active and passive. Ballistic stretching is something we want to avoid at all costs. It's bouncing. So that's what happens in ballistic stretching is the muscle is stretched beyond its length, or it goes too far too fast, and actually the muscle will contract to protect itself, and it can cause injury, so it causes tearing. So we never want to bounce. Ballistic bouncing is very, very bad for the body. PNF, or proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation, is partner stretching. We don't usually do that in a group fitness setting just because of the high risk for injury. So if you're going to do that in a class or with a group of people, make sure you're trained on how to do it properly, because it is potential for injury with that. You want to keep your people safe. Long-term flexibility, so we're talking slow, controlled, static stretching. We're aiming about 30 seconds per stretch. Aim for one set per side. If you can get 2 in there, that's great, but 1 is awesome. And we're looking at about 5 minutes at the end of class stage for stretching. So focus on the muscles that are overloaded during the workout. So if you did a step class, focusing on the calves, the hip flexors, the hamstrings, and those that are tight due to lifestyle, maybe you throw a chest stretch in there, because we didn't do any weights or maybe with the class, but you know the chest is tight for posture, so that's what you stretch and open up. Slow, deep music, with deep breathing and relaxation, so something that's going to allow people just to relax and to breathe into their class, so you're not using your cardiovascular music. And you always want to cue a pull, not pain. If you're sweating and you are turning red and you're working really hard in the stretch, that's too much. It should be something that feels good, not something that feels like the muscle is pulling off the bone. So you want to make sure people are listening to their bodies and not going too far. Make sure you provide lots of options and demonstrate the mid-range positions. So you might be able to show 3 different levels of a stretch, and people can go to or choose. And people usually know right away if they can get into it or not. So just encourage them to listen to their body and do what their body will let them do that day. You can be standing up, sitting on a chair, a BOSU or a stability ball or a bench, sitting on the floor, kneeling on the floor, lying on the floor. There's lots of ways that you can do your stretching. Try to aim for some flow. So rather than going from a standing to a lying to a seated to a standing to a kneeling all over the place, pick a theme. So you might start standing and then you go to seated and then you're lying, or you're just lying on the floor the whole time, just to give so that people aren't going up and down a lot. Just a little bit better flow if you have it kind of thinking about it and let it make sense. Make sure you cue posture when you stretch. A lot of people just let their bodies fall into a stretch. You will still want to concentrate on having good posture, especially with the spine. So avoiding the rounding of the back. So think about pushing the chest forward and lifting from the low back as opposed to just rounding and collapsing the chest. And also cue breathing. Breathing is so important to make sure that people are actually getting oxygen into their bodies when they're stretching, because sometimes people forget to breathe when they stretch. So there in the DVD, there's a flexibility piece that you can watch that's referenced on page 104.